Welcome back, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Alex and I am a PhD student at the Faculty of Social Sciences in Ljubljana. And for today's video, I decided to present some books that I've read recently and also the books that I'm gonna read after them, and they in a way they connect. So my idea for this video is just to briefly discuss two books I read and introduce three of them. Two of them I have already mentioned in another video, and one of them I haven't spoken about previously, I believe. So the first thing I want to say is that I read two books through which this reading material that I was reading, I was trying to explore possible topics for an essay that I have to write for one of the courses that I have in the second semester. And I decided to see and explore different approaches to theoretical approaches and research approaches that different academics or researchers have. One of them was like a total disappointment for me. I expected a bit more from it, or maybe something completely different to gain out of it, but it didn't really deliver. The other one was very much what I was seeking to find, and they sort of balanced each other out in that sense. So I will start with Anarcho-Blackness, Notes Towards Black Anarchism by Marquis. For me, this book didn't work at all. First, I didn't like the writing style, as this post-structuralist writing where a lot of the references and sentence constructions, the way they are done is you have to read several times the same sentence to be able to try to understand what the author was trying to get at. And for me, this is exhausting. If the writing is not on point and doesn't give me straightforward kind of theoretical concepts so I can relate to practically as well, then that's not a good writing for me. It does work. I'm talking about theoretical non-fiction books. Another aspect is that this book is heavily founded on the American context, and that simply doesn't work anywhere else, because different parts of the world have different kind of histories, different contexts, and it's very difficult to translate this into another region, especially to the region where I live. This kind of analysis of race and structural racism, it just doesn't work in my region. So that was mainly why I found it lacking in that aspect. I guess if you come from US, you can relate to this more, and if you're going to be researching some topic that is in the US or community that is in the US, then this book might work for you. But on another level, this kind of theoretical aspect, even the author, he says it himself that what he writes in this book only remains within the theoretical context. So it's very difficult to put this in praxis. And that's for me lacking, because anarchism is all about practice. Feel like this book lacks in that regard. So the second book that I read is To Exist is to Resist, Black Feminism in Europe, and it's edited by Akwugo, Emejulu and Francesca Sobande. And the book is divided in 5 parts, and each chapter is written by a different author. All of the women who are included here are either academics, researchers, or writers. All of them come from Europe. They write in the European context. I'm not sure whether they all come from Europe, but they write about European states. And again, another thing that I have to mention is that most of these, all of these states are either located in the west of Europe or in the north of Europe, and there are two Mediterranean states, Spain and Greece. So it's diverse in the sense that it covers different states, different research topics, and these five parts in the book, they are first part is the introduction, and it's by the editors. They have a chapter called On the Problems and Possibilities of European Black Feminism and Afro-Feminism. The second chapter is, or the second part is called Resistance, Solidarity and Coalition Building. Third, Emotion, Affect and Intimate Relations. Fourth, Surviving the Academy. Fifth, Digital and Creative Labor. So I will mention just several chapters that kind of stood out for me. The first one, I have to say that in the introduction, the authors actually addressed the criticism that I directed towards the previous book. And I will read one part here that where she explains this in more eloquently than I did and in detail. She says, Black American culture is a key way the United States exercises its soft power. In the Black diaspora, Black American culture looms large and has a tendency to crowd out and misunderstand other histories and understandings of Blackness and resistance. For example, pretty much everyone knows the basic story of the American Civil Rights Movement and some of its key players from Rosa Parks to Martin Luther King Jr. However, the same popular knowledge does not exist about liberation struggles outside the United States and from which American activists drew inspiration. So there is a constant tension between the Black diaspora of having Black American politics and culture dominate with little reciprocal knowledge about the long history of anti-imperialist and anti-colonial struggles in Europe and against various European empires. Thus, we read Angela Davis and Kwame Ture, but less so Aimé Césaire and Gail Lewis. This lacuna matters greatly to how we think about Blackness, solidarity and resistance. These dynamics are reinforced by the domination of the English language, which further prefaces American and to a lesser extent British texts. So a lot of the authors come from Britain, and I think one of the authors comes from Britain, but she is currently residing in Berlin, and she actually wrote a brilliant chapter regarding her experience in the German academia, and I really enjoyed that. I think that part was the one that I enjoyed the most. I guess as someone who is now part of the academia, I am seeking out materials that are giving constructive criticism of the academia, where what are the things that are missing and how we can actually improve. Although you can also say that in the context that we live today and how academia operates, it's very difficult that within the system, that's what I believe, we can actually restructure and change fundamentally something that is really affecting academic work, academic institutions in a negative way. So but at the same time, I believe that we should criticize and we should point out things where we can better the institution itself. But I guess that can also change. Does it need to be an institution? I mean, there's so many angles that you can approach this criticism of academia. So I will mention several chapters. First one is the collective mobilization of African women in Athens, United We Stand. I found this chapter brilliant, particularly because as someone who speaks Greek and has lived in Greece as a child and understand how Greek culture and Greek politics operate and how conservative Greek society can be, it was very interesting for me to read about the struggles of the black women who migrated to Greece and who have been denied citizenship because of this nationalism, Greek idea of like very strict idea of what it means to be Greek. I think for all kind of states around this region, especially in the Balkans, it's pretty much similar story. But it was interesting in that perspective, and also it is the only Balkan state that is mentioned here, and I found that refreshing. Even though Greek culture is really, really far away from what the culture of Serbia is in some regards. Like we go apart like in a lot of aspects, but there is this relationship between Greece and Serbia that was based upon the mutual hatred of everything Turkish and this building of a myth of the evil Turk who oppressed the Orthodox peoples during the Ottoman Empire. And this Islamophobia directed towards the Bosniak population during the 90s. For those of you who don't know, there were even volunteers from Greece who were volunteering. I'm not sure whether they had their own brigade or not, but they were volunteering in the civil war in Yugoslavia and with the sole purpose of killing Bosniak population in Bosnia. So from that perspective, I'm kind of glad to see Greece included here, and where we see a critical approach to this nationalistic obsession and very narrow-minded categorization of what it means to be Greek. So here, the second chapter is those who, or fourth chapter in the book, but second chapter for me, which kind of left a strong impression on me, is those who fight for us without us are against us. Afro-feminist activism in France. I have to say that this chapter didn't offer anything particularly new for me. I know a lot about the French context, about French colonialism and how French behave towards the migrants who come from Africa, different parts of the African continent, whether that is the Sub-Saharan Africa or North Africa. It's very familiar. I have read before some articles and books on it, and I have used for my MA thesis, I have used a lot of French authors who write about Islamophobia in the French society and so on. The next chapter is chapter 8. It's called Uses of Black African Literature and Afro-Feminist Literary Spaces by Women of Color in French-speaking Switzerland. And I really love this chapter. It was brilliant. As someone who enjoys reading books and reads for fun and for further education and as the main learning tool for me, I found it brilliant how the author Pamela Ohene Nyako approached the interviews that she did with women who are part of this literary group, and the opinions that these women expressed. It was very interesting to hear their perspectives on how the publishing industry works in Switzerland and in comparison to the publishing industry in the English-speaking countries like UK, US, and the availability of the authors who come from African continent, different African states. So in that aspect, I feel like it was really enriching and very satisfactory for me to read it. Next one is called Black Pete, Black Motherhood and Womanist Ethics by Lubumbe Wandevelde. I believe this author is from Netherlands, I think, or Belgium, just a second, because she talks about the Dutch experience with Black Pete and the Belgian experience as well, of how Black Pete is entrenched in the Dutch culture. And I knew about this. I've watched some reports on it, news reports, and we even had, in one of the courses that we had here, we had some Dutch exchange students who were actually speaking about this and how they grew up with this myth of Santa Claus and Black Pete, and how this is actually so rooted in the Dutch culture and celebration, I guess, of Christmas. It was very, very interesting. Next chapter is Warriors and Survivors, Eartha Kitt Files. I was not familiar with this singer, but I guess she was and still is very famous. And this chapter is basically like an interview with her that the author did, I believe, in the early 1990s. And it was really nice to read. It was sort of like a memoir approach. She writes about her mother and how she got acquainted to the singer through her mother, and how she did the interview but never published it. And then years later, she, like, it was lost somehow in some move, and then she found it, and it was really interesting to hear her perspective, how her idea of the singer and the idea of her mother in relationship to the singer changed over the years, especially since both of them have passed away, and how she found some comfort and solace in this interview, like going back to it after so many years. The next chapter is from the part 4, Surviving the Academia, or the Academy, and that's 13th chapter in the Changing Light, Daring to be Powerful by Yassine Devetzi, I think. And she writes about her experience as a mentor for different students at the university where she works. And she is basically using a sort of this autoethnography. And it was very interesting to hear her perspective, how to mentor well students who not only struggle academically in some aspects, or maybe not even struggle academically, but they are struggling in other ways in their private life, and how she can help them to overcome those struggles while she is also mentoring them to complete their thesis. Next chapter is chapter 15. It's Creating Space Within the German Academy, Melody Hose, I think. Please forgive me if I mispronounce this. And I already mentioned this chapter. 16, chapter 16, A Manifesto for Survival, Sadia Qureshi. I found her, she is like criticizing she says, like, the first sentence is, academia is pale, male, and stale. We all ought to know this, but few of us are familiar with the figures that starkly illustrate the profound marginalization of women, people of color, and blackness within British academia. I really enjoyed the humor that these authors have, how they are using humor to convey the absurdities that we see in how racist structures function. So I really enjoyed that. And then the fifth part, I'm just gonna mention the first chapter, and that is the chapter 19th. It's called But Some of Us Are Tired, Black Women's Personal Feminist Essays in the Digital Sphere by Keshina Boom or Keshina Boom. I'm not sure. Please forgive me if I mispronounce this. I come from the Balkans. It's very difficult for me sometimes to read some English names. She writes, actually, I had to Google her. Most of these authors I've never heard of before, and I had to Google her, and I found out that she has like a blog, and she's a freelance journalist. And what she writes about in this chapter is how often the pain and grief of Black feminist authors is exploited for the profit of different online magazines and journals. I found it really striking the way she addresses this. I will try to find the part. Here it is. She says, "It seems to me that her white fascination with Black suffering was not merely a personal interest, but indicative of the wider impulse by whiteness to reify the position of Blackness as a site of lament, as a possessive investment in whiteness. As Bell Hooks notes, voices and beings of non-white women are turned into commodity spectacle for the benefit of whiteness." So she here is referring to this editor that she was pitching a story to, and she had, I think, several stories that she pitched, but her editor, well, this editor was interested in a story about, I think it was something like self-hatred, being in abusive relationships. It wasn't quite, she wasn't quite explicit about it. She was mostly focused on explaining how uncomfortable it was for her to revisit this. Yeah, she says here, "A month after my piece was published on BuzzFeed, the former BuzzFeed content creator Kat Blake created a video on her YouTube channel about how BuzzFeed maintains a reputation as a site of racial, sexual, and gender diversity, yet is ultimately exploiting marginalized voices for its own profit. My pain, my suffering would gain my editor clicks, which in turn would gain her company money. Perhaps she would even be praised for benevolently deigning to give me a voice, to have fought past her socialized impulse to not see me as a racialized woman. Our Black female traumas, marketized and monetized, our white people's guilt assuaged and pockets lined." I think she's really on point. A lot of the times we are not aware of these things, and she talks about how uncomfortable she was, yet she persisted in doing this article and writing this article because she needed the money. And we are often put in these precarious positions because of our financial position. But then she says, like, it's not like this money would have made a big deal financially for me. I could have done without it. And she's kind of like being very critical of herself, and whether, like, regretting why she agreed, and kind of going back and forth, re-examining her position, how much of her responsibility was in this whole story. And I really admired her ability to kind of approach it from different angles and say like, look, I also hold some responsibility for agreeing, but I mean, I feel like it's very easy that from this perspective now, when she was writing this chapter, to say like, oh, I could have said no, but at the time when this was happening, and most of us experience this in situations where we feel uncomfortable, we sometimes like are pushed to agree to do something even though we don't want to. But in the end, yeah, she said yes. I mean, I don't know, I haven't read that article. I don't know if it's still available online. But I think her story was this chapter and the second chapter about the organizing of the Black African women in Greece and collective organizing there. Those were the chapters that stood out the most. If I could pick two favorite from all of the ones that I mentioned here, then those two would be it for me. And then briefly, I will just mention what I will be reading next. And I already talked about this book in my previous vlog, and that is Greater Than the Sum of Our Parts, Feminism, Internationalism, and Palestine, Elia. And another book, it's Anarcho-Indigenism, Conversations on Land and Freedom. There are different authors, but it was edited by Francis Dupuis-Deri and Benjamin Pillet, or Pillet, I think it's Pillet. And I think this is mostly like interviews and sort of like conversation like chapters, so it should be a fast read. And finally, this one I already mentioned, so I won't talk about it. Constellations of Care, Anarcha-Feminism in Practice. And why I'm looking forward to this book, it's because the activists who wrote each chapter come from different countries, different backgrounds, different socio-political contexts, and it's going to be very interesting to read how they have practically applied anarchist theory. So that's it for this video, and then I will report. I actually got this from a friend. It's a gift. It's a little bookmark. Then I will report on the other books that I'm reading for this longer vlog where I'm analyzing 3 novels. 2 more to go. Thank you for stopping by, and I hope to see you in the next vlog. And please leave a comment if any of these books kind of are sounded interesting to you, or it's something that you would like to read. If not, you can also leave that comment, and sharing is caring. Bye!